Okay, our lesson for this day is z-test for a proportion, which means we're going to test the hypothesis involving population proportions. And take note, yung proportion natin dito is the same as percentage of a population. Okay, so in percent yung ating proportion. And here is our lesson objective. At the end of this lesson, you're expected to test proportions using the z-test. And here are some examples ng tinatawag nating population proportions or percentage of the population. 59% of consumers purchase gifts for their fathers. So, ang ating population dito ay yung consumers. So, yung 59% that can be considered as probability of success. Okay? Na yung consumer ay bibili ng gifts para sa kanilang ama. And the other percentage of the population, which is 41%, yun yung 0.41 equivalent to probability of failure that these consumers will not buy or will not purchase gifts for their fathers. 59% is the probability of success, 41% is the probability of failure. Another example is 70% of the people in the Philippines was vaccinated to achieve the herd immunity for COVID-19. 71% of Filipinos buy generic products. And last example is 35% of Filipinos go out for dinner once a week. So mapapansin natin, yung mga percentage dito, ito yung tinatawag nating population proportion. Okay? Yung hypothesis testing natin involving population proportion can be considered as binomial experiment na kung saan there are only two possible outcomes, success and a failure. At yung probability ng success natin hindi nagbabago from trial to trial. So more of these ipapaliwanag ko sa inyo doon sa next slides. Okay? And the formula for the z-test for proportions is this one. Z equals p hat minus p all over p times q over n, na kung saan yung p hat natin is the sample proportion, x over n. P is population proportion, and n is the sample size. Okay? And the derivation of this formula is based from the general formula in testing our value, that is observed value minus expected value over standard error. Yung p hat natin, yung observed value, that is came from the sample. And expected value, yun yung ating population proportion. And the square root of pq over n is the standard error. So using the formula for z-test, we have x bar minus mu over the sigma. Our formula for the z-test for proportion is this one, p hat minus p all over pq over n. Okay? And we have assumptions for testing a proportion. One is sample should be a random sample, and the conditions for a binomial experiment are satisfied. And later I'm going to give you the conditions for a binomial experiment. And n times p should be greater than or equal to 5, and n times q is greater than or equal to 5. Yung p natin, that is the population proportion or the probability of success. Yung q natin, that is 1 minus p. Okay, take note, 1 minus p yung ating q. That is the probability of failure. And it should be greater than or equal to 5 when you multiply that to our sample size. Okay? And here are the conditions para masabi natin qualified yung ating yung ating experiment is a binomial experiment. Okay? One is there must be a fixed number of trials. Two, each trial can have only two outcomes or outcomes that can be reduced to two outcomes. These outcomes can be considered as either success or failure. The outcomes of each trial must be independent of one another. The probability of a success must remain the same for each trial. So to better understand itong requirements para masatisfy natin that this is a binomial experiment, I'm going to give you an example. We have a coin is tossed 3 times. Find the probability of getting exactly 2 heads. So ang sample space natin are the following. We have 8 elements of the sample space. Ang tinatanong sa atin, probability of exactly getting 2 heads. So meron tayong elements na 2 heads dito At ilan ang ating elements of the sample space ay 8. So 3 over 8 is our probability of getting exactly 2 heads. So pag-aralan natin kung na-satisfy nito yung binomial experiment. There are 4 requirements na nabanggit ko sa last slide. So, dapat daw para ma-satisfy yung binomial experiment, if this is a binomial experiment, number 1, dapat may fixed number of trials. So, pag-toss ng coin, nakalagay dito 3 times. So, fix yung number of trials. There are only 2 outcomes for each trial. Tama. Heads or tails. Satisfy natin number 2. Number 3, the outcomes are independent of one another. Says the outcome of one toss is no way affects the outcome of another toss. So, hindi na-apektuhan yung trial. So, independent yung bawat trial or outcomes ng trial. Okay? The probability of a success must remain the same for each trial. So, the probability of getting head, which is the probability of success, hindi nababago sa bawat trial natin. Laging 1/2 pa rin. So, therefore, this is a binomial experiment. Yung aking example in tossing coin 3 times. Okay? So, nasatisfy natin yung 4 requirements of a binomial experiment. So, kapag nasatisfy natin yung requirements of a binomial experiment, so yung ating assumptions for testing a proportion is also satisfied. Okay? So, I'm going to give you examples in testing population proportion using z-test. Thank you.